into another edition of the NFL Draft Show here on The Grueling Truth, where legends speak. My name is Dan Kornhauser, and I'm your host for this show for tonight. I want to thank you guys for joining me for my presentation of my 2023 NFL Mock Draft 2.0. You can head over to thegruelingtruth.com. The article will be posted on there. I've also had it shared to NFL Mock Draft Database. So if that's not on there yet, it'll be on there soon. So you can click on there through that. But I'm going to be doing the mock draft. I'm going to go down live with you guys in case you don't feel like reading through. You could just watch this. And I'll give you a little more information, a little more analysis on each pick. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm going to share this tab here. I got my beers ready. And yeah, it looks good. Let's do it. So Mock Draft 2.0, the NFL Draft is in just a few weeks, 3 weeks from this weekend. We'll be doing it. All the bullets will be flying live. I'll be watching Draft Day later on, and I'll probably watch Draft Day a few more times than Kevin Costner or whatnot before Draft Day. You know, 'tis the season. But let's jump right into it here. All right, let's get going. The first pick, very simple. Carolina Panthers. They traded up. They gave a bevy of picks. They gave up more wide receiver to Chicago to move up from 9 to 1, all to take a quarterback. Now, the rumors are swirling these days that it's Bryce Young. Apparently, Bryce Young is now the betting favorite. He jumped ahead of C.J. Stroud. Anthony Richardson is still in the conversation. And while I think that's less likely to happen than the other two, it is worth mentioning. So let's do it. I have them taking C.J. Stroud. I had them taking C.J. Stroud when I did my mock draft 1.0 a couple months ago. I see no reason to change that now. He's accurate. He's got the size teams look for, 6'2", 6'3", 220 plus pounds. He's accurate to all levels of the field. He can make every throw. Doesn't have the rocket arm like Richardson or the Mahomes of the world, but he can get it done. And I think between these two guys, either Young or Stroud, I think it's going to be Stroud, mostly because he fits the style of quarterback that their new head coach, Frank Reich, liked. And let's be honest, it is the NFL. Prototype size typically gets the nod over guys who are considered undersized or outliers for one reason or another. So I'm going to go with C.J. Stroud, number 1 to Carolina. And that brings us to number 2, the Houston Texans. For me, this is pretty straightforward. I have them taking quarterback Bryce Young out of Alabama. They screwed up. All right. They won a meaningless game at the end of the year they had no business doing. Screwed it up on their end to try to get the number 1 overall pick. But it may work out in the end if they can still get their guy. Now, there's rumors swirling around this pick lately that if they don't get the quarterback that they want, that they might go defensive player or they might try to trade down. I'm not buying either of those two things. You don't have the 2nd overall pick in a draft with a couple of legitimate franchise quarterback prospects with a need at the position. Your team sucks. It's been sucking, and you don't have any real options on the roster that you can plug in that'll do anything special. So I think if they didn't take a quarterback here, I don't care if it's Young, Stroud, Richardson, or Levis. It doesn't matter. They have to take a quarterback here. You cannot go into the season with Davis Mills as your quarterback again. Anything less than taking a quarterback at this spot, or if they want to trade down and they like any of the quarterbacks and they still end up with one, anything less will be franchise just neglect and malpractice. And everyone should be fired immediately. So don't overthink it. Take the quarterback, move on. And that brings us to the 3rd overall pick, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. Now, for context, folks, I'm not doing any trades in this mock. I know it's not realistic. Trades are going to happen on draft day, but it gets crazy. So I just wanted to see what the board might fall, what it might look like if it falls this way without teams going crazy in the top 10. So assuming Arizona doesn't move out of that 3rd slot, I have them taking Will Anderson Jr., the stud edge rusher from Alabama, back-to-back Alabama player being taken. And this is pretty simple. They're a franchise that doesn't have a lot of talent on either side of the ball. They're not taking quarterback because they have Kyler Murray. Yes, he's injured, but he'll be back probably in the second half of the year. And let's be honest, they need help on the defensive side of the ball. They added a couple of young pass rushers last year via the draft. Cam Thomas, Majai Sanders. They're okay rotational pieces, but neither one of them is Will Anderson Jr. And assuming they don't trade down with a team like Tennessee, who's, I mean, the rumors are red hot. Okay, let's just call it for what it is. Tennessee's got a new GM. He might want to make a splash. They have Ryan Tannehill at quarterback, but they need something behind him, and Malik Willis clearly ain't it. It was a disastrous season last year. It got to the point where they couldn't even play the kid, which kind of played into what everybody was saying going into the draft of how raw he was and so on and so forth. But Arizona could trade out. Maybe Indianapolis moves up one spot. Maybe Seattle moves up from 5. Maybe the Raiders move up from 7. All right. There's a lot of different things that could happen with that third pick. And it sounds like the Cardinals are interested in trading back. We'll just have to see how far back they go and what the eventual package is that they receive in return. That leads us to the number 4 overall pick, which is the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this is another team that needs a quarterback, and the rumors are swirling that Anthony Richardson might very well be the guy that they take here. Now, that's certainly possible. Out of all these quarterbacks, out of any player in this draft class, Anthony Richardson has been the one whose name has come up a lot, and his stock has rocketed up since the scouting combine and since the end of the college football season. And, for good reason. He has all the physical tools that you look for. He's athletic, big arm, but he's really raw. And for me personally, I liken it to a similar situation that we had with Malik Willis last year. Is he as bad as Willis? No. But, if you look at some of the advanced stats and some analytics, they are really, really close in terms of their accuracy numbers and whatnot in college. And they're not pretty for either of these two players. Really, really bad stuff. But all that aside, I can see why Richardson is the favorite for this spot and maybe even to go 3rd overall or even 1st overall. But in this one, I have the Colts taking Will Levis, and maybe that's a mistake because there's not a lot of hype around Will Levis these days. There's no real rumors of teams falling in love with him, which is weird because just a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, there were rumors that he was the top quarterback on more than one team's draft board. The fact that he also is mobile, has a big arm, can make all the throws, has that prototype size, played a pro-style offense in college, ran by 2 offensive coordinators who have ties to the NFL. A lot of good stuff there, and I can see why a pro team would like it, but he also needs some work. And if I'm Indianapolis and I'm looking at one of these 2 quarterbacks, either Richardson or Levis, and there's even a minute possibility that one of these 2 guys is going to be starting this year at some point, I would rather go towards the Levis rather than the Richardson, even though Richardson's ceiling is much higher and the potential is a lot better there. It's just one of those things. I don't know. NFL teams seem to be more cautious. And when I do these mock drafts, I try to think as though I'm the GM of that particular team. And when I'm making these mocks and when I'm making these predictions, I have to think about things like that because that's what these teams think of. That's what these general managers are in meetings talking to their scouts about, talking to their coaches about. And it gets to the point where, do you take the risk and go for that sort of a player like an Anthony Richardson who needs a lot of development, but the talent is mouthwatering? Or do you go with a guy who has a similar level of talent physically, just a little more seasoning in pro-style offenses, a little more potential to start right away, which in this era of the NFL, it's all about starting your rookies and playing them early and making moves. So I'll go with Will Levis here. And I actually had them trading up to number 1 overall in my mock draft 1.0. Granted, they don't have to trade up now. He falls to them at 4th overall. But they're another team. Besides Houston, besides Carolina, they have to come out of this draft with a quarterback. Moving on to the 5th pick. Here we go. The Seattle Seahawks. Okay, so Seattle isn't pretty, all right? 5th overall. And if this is the way the board falls, you have a choice of arguably the best edge rusher, Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech, who has a lot of fans. You have Jalen Carter, who is arguably the best prospect in this class. And we'll get to Carter a little bit more in depth later on. But Jalen Carter from Georgia, the defensive lineman, would be on the board. They also have a tendency to go for guys like a Nolan Smith, the edge rusher out of Georgia, who is undersized but is extremely athletic, very versatile, put on a show at the scouting combine. That kind of athletic profile is something that Seattle tends to like. And then you have a guy like Anthony Richardson. Okay, yes, they brought back Geno Smith on a 3-year deal, but in reality, I think it's a 1 or 2 year opt out. I think it's a 2nd year opt out that they can opt out of that deal, which if they take Anthony Richardson is perfect. They can start Geno Smith, who had a great year for them last year, for the whole season pending injury. They could even plan to start him next year, or if they like Anthony Richardson's development over this season, they could give him the reins next year and get rid of and have Geno Smith as the veteran backup next year and then cut him loose when his cap hit gets too high before the 3rd season of his contract. So there's a lot of ways they can go. But if I'm Seattle sitting here, if I'm Pete Carroll, taking a quarterback, you don't know if you're going to be picking that high for another quarterback anytime soon. But you want to win games now. You want to add a talent that can shore up a weakness, and you just made the playoffs. The NFC West can be had. I mean, yes, San Francisco is absolutely loaded at every position except quarterback, but quarterback is the most important position. And they're going to be without Brock Purdy, who had an amazing season as a rookie, Mr. Irrelevant. And if Trey Lance struggles, that offense is going to struggle. So it's something to be seen out in the West that maybe Seattle thinks the West can be had. So I think if they go with a guy like a Tyree Wilson here, the edge rusher out of Texas Tech, you plug him right in. He can play inside. He can play outside. Uber athletic, elite size. I mean, that screams Seattle to me. Okay, but they're another interesting team, so it'll be something worth watching. Let's see here. All right, 6th pick. We're making moves. With the 6th pick, the Detroit Lions are on the clock. And they're another team that can go a number of directions here. Jalen Carter, if he's still on the board, would be an A-plus home run pick. Fits a massive need for them up front because they've added prospects via the draft in recent years, guys like Aleem McNeil, but it just hasn't been quite the impact that they've been expecting or hoping for. And a guy like Jalen Carter inside with Aiden Hutchinson on the outside, with their stable of edge rushers that they have, that could be a devastating front. But Detroit cares about the off the field. They care about the intangibles. Detroit's GM will come out and I don't think there's been a single interview where he doesn't talk about intangibles when he's talking about these prospects. So a guy like Jalen Carter, as talented as he might be, probably the best player in this class, considered by many. I don't think it fits. It's just not the right look for this team, which makes things a little tricky. Another one, Anthony Richardson could be an option here. He sits behind Goff for at least the year. The team can move on from Goff after next season at very little or no cap hit. So that could be a direction that they go in, try to get a young rookie quarterback, sit for a year, learn behind a seasoned vet like Goff, who's been to a Super Bowl, who's had success in the system, and then take over. And then you've got a rookie quarterback contract for the next 4 or 5 years. You can build around him, spend money elsewhere, re-sign Amon-Ra, St. Brown, so on and so forth, beef up the team. I thought about that very strongly here, but I went with a player that can contribute right away. And yes, they added to the secondary, but let's be honest. In the NFL these days, you're playing with at least 3 corners 75% of the time. You can never have too many. And there's an elite one on the board in Christian Gonzalez, corner from Oregon. Good size, good length, excellent athlete. Scouts wanted to see him make more plays on the ball, which had been an issue in his career. He came into this season with no career interceptions at Colorado, but he transferred to Oregon, got 4 picks this season, 7 pass deflections. He showed up in that sense, and he locked down his side of the field. So I think that's a great pick. Gonzalez could very well be a top 10 pick regardless if the Lions take him to the 6th or not. But I'm going to go him. I'm going to go Christian Gonzalez 6 here. And that brings us to the Raiders at number 7. Anthony Richardson. Very simple. The full stops. Like I said, elite athlete, elite arm, interviewed well, quick release, but he needs to work on his accuracy. He needs to work on his mechanics. If he sits for at least a season, awesome. The Raiders have Jimmy G. They don't need Richardson. Now, could the Raiders address other positions, pass rusher, offensive tackle? Absolutely. But they're one of the rare teams in this top 10, top 7 that can take Richardson and not have to rely on him right away. The Colts would probably have to put Richardson on the field before he's ready, which would probably be detrimental to his development. The Raiders won't have that problem. They can sit this kid for at least a year or two, let Jimmy G do his thing. Jimmy is a little older and injury prone, so that's just a matter of time before he goes down. But it's an ideal situation, a quarterback-friendly system with McDaniels, and it's an interesting fit, but I like it. And it is a mock draft. I'll be doing a couple more before the draft actually starts, so that might change in my mock draft 3.0. Keep an eye out for that. But the Atlanta Falcons are next on the clock, sitting pretty at number 8 overall. And this was a tough one for me because they also have Jalen Carter still sitting on the board, staring them in the face. They're another team that needs defensive line help. They need edge rushers. They're one of the worst teams in the league in terms of sacks. They only got 21 as a team, 31st in the league. Can't win games doing that. So if they're really committed to Desmond Ridder at quarterback, then they have to address the defensive front. So Carter would be a great fit, but do they want to deal with it? That's the big question. Do teams want to deal with the off-the-field questions, with the concerns of his effort? He gained, I think, 8 or 9 pounds after the scouting combine, looked lethargic at Georgia's pro day, could not finish drills. Teams take note of that. And yes, at the end of the day, your talent trumps all for the most part. If you're uber talented, like a guy like Carter is, teams are more likely to forgive you for these sorts of transgressions, but maybe they don't want to deal with it. So let's say they don't. I went with that. I said, you know what? They're going to play it safe. They don't want to deal with it. They're someone with leadership ability. They want something else. Why not Nolan Smith? Stay with Georgia, but take his teammate. Nolan Smith gets rave reviews from teammates, both teammates that are still at Georgia and teammates that are already in the NFL. He was the leader of that defense, or one of the main leaders of that defense, besides the Kobe Dean last season. And I mean, like I said, he showed out at the scouting combine, one of the fastest times at the scouting combine this year. Showed off his explosion in the drills, and he's everything a team like Atlanta would look for. He holds up well against the run. He can move inside on passing downs. He can play outside. He can drop into coverage. And I would be surprised if he falls out of the top 10 come draft day. The Chicago Bears sitting at number 9. This was where the slide had to stop for Jalen Carter. And why not? I mean, if you're Chicago, you need help up front. Another team that needs defensive line help up front. Why not take the player you may have very well taken at number 1 overall? This is akin to draft day, where the Seahawks had the number 1 pick. They traded down. There was Bo Callahan, the quarterback, was the star player of that class. And he fell because everyone passed on him after the Browns traded up to get 1st overall. He falls, and then they're sitting there pretty, and they're like, oh, man, we're sitting here at the 7th pick. We could have gotten the guy at that we wanted to take at 1, we save a few $1,000,000. We take him at 7, and we come out of this looking like the smartest franchise in the NFL. Well, it went a little different in the movie, but that's what they were thinking, and it's a win, okay, when you can get arguably the best player in the class. But Carter comes with a lot of questions. He was involved. He pleaded no contest in connection to a fatal car accident that involved 2 people, a coach and I believe a teammate or something along those lines. But 2 people connected to the Georgia program passed away. Some drag racing incident where he was allegedly involved in some way, shape, or form, but he pleaded no contest. He got some fines, he got probation, he has to do community service, that sort of thing. So he avoided jail time, but it still points to his lack of maturity. And when you are a young athlete on the verge of becoming a multimillionaire, teams are investing a lot into you, not just money, their reputation, their coaches' time, etc. Okay, they're investing a lot into you. They want to make sure you're right in all the ways. But up here is important. Okay, the physical is just part of it. So that wasn't a good start. Then at Georgia's pro day, as I had mentioned earlier, he showed up out of shape, 8-9 pounds heavier than he was at the scouting combine. Couldn't finish his drills, looked real lethargic. It was just a sad sight, apparently. I read article after article talking about just how disappointed people were with that. And that's not a good look, considering the legal troubles he had, the fact that he had to leave the scouting combine early, didn't perform at the scouting combine aside from weigh-ins and some interviews and whatnot. But just ugly offseason overall. It's worth taking a swing at 9th overall. Why not? So if it wasn't going to be Chicago, it was going to be the next pick. It was going to be Philadelphia for me. So I have him going to Chicago, 9th overall. And that brings us to Philadelphia. Now, Philly filled a lot of needs by bringing some key guys back, Fletcher Cox, Darius Slay, Bradbury, etc. So this next pick might sound a little weird, but I have them taking Illinois cornerback Devin Witherspoon. Witherspoon is a little undersized. He's 5'11", but he's feisty. He was elite in man coverage. He's got good ball skills. He's more than willing to mix it up in the ground game. He gave up 0 touchdowns in coverage this season, got 3 interceptions, 14 pass breakups, and allowed only 206 yards on 22 receptions this season for Illinois. Yes, the Eagles have Darius Slay. Yes, they have James Bradbury. But both those guys are getting old, and they were this close to letting go of not just one, but both of them. So they lucked out that both guys came back. But both of those players can opt out of those contracts after just a couple of seasons. So if they're going to be aging, expensive, but opt-out candidates in a year or two, maybe they cut bait with one or both of these guys next offseason. They're going to need corners. And yes, they have Maddox, and they do have some pieces behind the big 2. But a guy like Witherspoon, like I said, you're playing in the nickel most of the time. You want as much good talent in the secondary as you can get. Witherspoon can play in the slot to start. He can play outside in a pinch. And I think it'd be a great addition to the Eagles. Now, before we move on, I want to thank you guys again for tuning in. And I want to let you guys know that we are brought to you by betting.net. Betting.net is your best bet for sportsbook and casino sites. So head on over to betting.net. Now, we just finished with the top 10. I went in a little bit. Took a little bit longer than I thought I would, but that's okay. Now that we're done with the top 10, we can just plow through these the rest of these picks in the first round. Call it a day. So the Tennessee Titans, number 11, sitting pretty. All right, stuck between a rebuild and trying to contend in a shitty division, the AFC South. Well, I have them staying put. Again, no trades in this mock. And I have them taking Paris Johnson Jr., the left tackle from Ohio State. They need offensive line help. Okay, they lost Taylor Lewan. Their offensive line was already if not the worst, one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL this past season. They couldn't pass protect properly. If not the worst, one of the worst. Derrick Henry did well, but they had a lot of trouble opening up holes for him. Some of that was just Derrick doing Derrick things. Hashtag bow wow. But they absolutely need offensive tackle help. They need offensive line help. They might even double dip into the position as the draft goes on. Now, if they don't trade up for Anthony Richardson to the 3rd overall pick, this is still a win. This is an A-plus move. Paris Johnson, plug and play left tackle from day one. Protect Tannehill. Maybe take a quarterback on the second day. There's going to be a few good ones available, and go from there. But I don't think this is a team that can afford to trade up. They're in a weird spot between rebuilding long-term and just tearing it all down and still trying to contend. I don't think you can do both. So they got to pick one. Pick a struggle. I have them staying 11, going Paris Johnson. Now, Houston at 12 overall. They took Bryce with their first pick, and now they need to give him some help. Adding Schultz at tight end as a free agent from Dallas was a good start. But let's be honest, they have nothing at the wide receiver position. Okay, Robert Woods does not inspire any sort of confidence, does not instill any fear at all. He's injury prone and he's old. And he's on a short-term contract. Nico Collins, you've had your chance to shine and grow, hasn't done anything. You're not quite right. They have to go with a wide receiver here. The only problem is there's no consensus number one really at this point. And it doesn't sound like teams are that enamored with this receiver position. That the teams are thinking they can get a guy in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th round that could be just as productive in year one as whoever they take in the 1st round. I'm going to disagree, and I'm going to have Jackson Smith and Jigba going here. JSN, wide receiver, Ohio State. He was the best wide receiver on the field when he was last healthy, not this past season, but the season prior, on a team that had 2 first-round wide receivers, has Marvin Harrison Jr., and let's just say they got a lot of talent in that wide receiver room. And JSN was the leading producer. I think that's worth noting, okay? He got injured, only played 5 snaps this season and missed the rest of the year due to injury, but that doesn't mean he suddenly forgot how to play the position. He's right. He's a plug and play. He is an excellent route runner. He was primarily a slot receiver, but he does have the size that you could put him on the outside. But even in the slot, he should be a difference maker. And that brings us to the New York Jets at number 13 overall. And this was one I was playing with in terms of what prospects they would go in. I know that I wanted to go offensive tackle here, but that I want to go with a guy like Broderick Jones, who's got elite athleticism, a high ceiling, tons of potential, but he needs to develop. He has some holes in his game. Or do we go with like a Peter Skoronski? Northwestern, short arms, but other than that, very technically sound. Started at left tackle for 3 years for Northwestern in the Big Ten, had battles against some elite edge rushers, and more often than not came out on top, short arms and all. I'm going to go Peter Skoronski here. A few years ago, they went with Mekhi Becton, athlete, big, long arms, etc. It hasn't really worked out. Injuries, lack of development, whatever. It just hasn't worked out with Mekhi Becton. Do they really want to go back to that well again? Maybe, maybe not. If they opt not to and decide to go with a guy who can just plug and play at left tackle and not worry about it, they might opt for a guy like Skoronski. I'm a huge fan. I don't know why anyone would move him to guard, but if they're so inclined to do that, they dealt with a lot of injuries this past season. If someone goes down on the inside and they still have Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton both healthy at tackle, you move Skoronski to guard, and you have a really good front for Aaron. But let's move on. The New England Patriots, number 14 overall. Now, this was a tough one for me because it is Bill Belichick. They might very well trade down, but there's a lot of rumors swirling around the Patriots at 14 that not only were they trying to trade Mac Jones, I don't know how much stock you take in that rumor, but the rumor was that they were trying to trade Mac Jones. I assume for some other quarterback, Rodgers or Lamar or whoever. It doesn't look like anything is going down there. Those rumors have kind of quieted down at this point. But now the big rumor for the Patriots is that they're looking at maybe beefing up their wide receiver room, which would make a lot of sense because their wide receivers suck. And they want to help their young quarterback out. So maybe they could go JSN if he was here. Maybe Jordan Addison, although Addison seems to be falling down the board for some. The other name that I've seen, and I've seen this name a lot more frequently recently, is Zay Flowers, the wide receiver out of Boston College. Now, I love Flowers. I do. But as good of a fit as he might be in that New England offense, playing out of the slot, doing different things in the ground game and reverses and whatnot, he is dangerous in the open field, the bubble screens. He could do a lot of work in New England. I think Bill wants the defense to be good, and he'll see the depth at the wide receiver position. You can get another guy in the second round potentially that you can plug right in, second, third round, you can plug right in the slot and let him do work in this offense. I trust Bill on that front. And they haven't had the best history taking wide receivers in the first round. A lot of the guys, whenever they've gone that route, it just hasn't really worked out too much. So I think they stay true to the Patriot way and the Bill Belichick way of doing things. And I think they add Brian Branch, the defensive back from Alabama, box safety, slot corner. They lost McCourty, who retired this offseason. So both McCourty brothers are gone now. Devin McCourty is the one who retired I'm talking about. They like their safeties. And yes, they have some options, but none of them are Brian Branch. And Branch's versatility, what does Belichick like with his defenders? Well, he likes Alabama players, number one, but he likes versatility, he likes aggressiveness, and he likes intelligence. Branch has all of those. Okay, like I said, he could play safety, he could play slot corner, he could play outside in a pinch. You don't want him there, but he can do it. He can blitz, he can tackle, he's got excellent short area quickness. He comes up in the ground game. He's got Patriot written all over him. So whether it's here at 14 overall or whether they trade down and take him then, it would not surprise me at all to see Brian Branch beat a Patriot come next season. Number 15, the Green Bay Packers. Now, this team is in a weird spot. I had them taking, I think I had them taking tight end in my mock draft 1.0. But you're not taking Kincaid. You're not taking, I don't think you're taking Mayer here. You're definitely not going to take a guy like Darnell Washington in the top 15. He's got too many holes in his game. So where do they go? They love edge rushers. They love defensive guys, but defensive linemen. But I mean, unless you're like Lucas Van Ness, maybe Miles Murphy, but these guys don't fill a hole, I feel. And if you want to get your bang for your buck, you're going to have a new quarterback in Jordan Love. And let's be honest, the Packers don't really have much at wide receiver. Watson was nice. He scored a lot of touchdowns in the second half of the year, but he's still young and he's still developing. And when you have a young quarterback who's going to be starting for the first time on his own without Rodgers being there, you're going to want to make him as comfortable as possible. And really the only options they have at receiver are Watson and Romeo Doubs. So I think they have to add to the position, and they're not one of those teams that will want to wait, I think. So if it's not a front seven player like Murphy or Van Ness or even Kalijah Cansey, I could see them going with like Jordan Addison. I don't have Addison as my top wide receiver. I don't have him as my number 2 receiver. But he displays crisp route running, elite separation down the field, across the middle. He's great with the ball in his hands, and I think he would be an excellent addition to this team. You'll have the big piece, the big vertical stretcher in Watson. You'll have the slot guy in Romeo Doubs, and then you'll have Jordan Addison who can do a little bit of everything. So I think that would be a nice wide receiver trio for Jordan Love moving forward. And where are we? Okay, here we go. Number 16, the Washington Commanders. This was another tough one. Um, I don't like Washington's roster. I don't. They could use help at a number of different positions, corner specifically, and offensive line specifically. Now, Joey Porter Jr. is still on the board. There's still Deontay Banks is still on the board. And there's still guys out there that are worth potentially taking in the secondary, but you want to keep that offensive line built right. If you're going to start Sam Howell at quarterback, you're going to want to protect him, give him as much you can up front. Now, I know they have Charles Leno, and I know they added Andrew Wiley from Kansas City in free agency. But neither one of these guys should prevent them from taking a talent like Broderick Jones, the offensive tackle from Georgia. I've heard some things that maybe Jones is another one who might slide into guard. I think that's foolish. I think he should stay on the outside. If anything, I know they just signed Wiley, but you bring in Jones, maybe you teach him a little bit of guard if you want to slide him inside as a rookie. And then once the rookie season is over, you move him back outside to tackle when you either get rid of Charles Leno, who's getting old, or Andrew Wiley. Both of those guys, similar to Darius Slay and James Bradbury, both of those guys could be gone within the next couple of years because they both have well, I know Wiley has an opt-out in his contract. And Leno, I mean, if you're going to be drafting an offensive tackle here, Leno might be too expensive to keep in a couple of years. He is getting up there in age. He lacks that prototype size. He's solid, not spectacular. And if you can upgrade for cheaper and younger and potentially better long-term, you do that. So I'll go with Broderick Jones here, number 16 overall to the Washington Commanders, formerly the Redskins. And I just want to remind you guys that your top sportsbook comparison site is betting.net. Betting.net offers extensive reviews on the best sports books out there, so you don't have to. Head on over to betting.net. So we are about halfway done. Here we go, the back half. It always feels like it takes forever, the back half. But the Pittsburgh Steelers are on the clock. I'm going to give them Joey Porter Jr., JPJ. His dad played for the Steelers, so Jr. should know all about the Steeler way. And, I mean, it's a perfect fit. They need help in the secondary. They could absolutely use corner. They lost Cameron Sutton, who left as a free agent to the Detroit Lions in free agency. They released William Jackson back in early March. So they might need to shore it up. James Pierre is nothing special, who they re-signed. And Patrick Peterson, who they brought in as a free agent, is old as dirt. You can't rely on these two guys on the outside. Porter Jr. is long, athletic, good in run support, and he can even play safety, some people think. So I think it was a no-brainer on multiple fronts. So let's move on. Detroit Lions, 18th overall. Myles Murphy, edge rusher from Clemson. If they go this route, they go Gonzalez with their first pick or another corner or whoever, and then they go Murphy with their second pick, I mean, that's an A+ in my book. You got a potential lockdown corner with one, and you've got a disruptive edge rusher who had an excellent pro day with your second pick at 18th overall. Now, Murphy was a guy who I put in the top 10 in my mock draft 1.0, but his stock has fallen a bit while other guys have been going in for different reasons. Still, first-round prospect, still an excellent pick at this point, and you put Murphy on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson, last year's second overall pick. That's how you wreak havoc. And the Lions could very well have their own NASCAR package where they trout out 4 defensive ends on 3rd and long, and you have Hutchinson and Murphy on the inside or something like that. Something scary, man. Something to think about. So I'll go Myles Murphy, edge rusher, Clemson, 18th overall, which brings us to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, sitting pretty at number 19. The Bucs are also a weird team because they can go in a number of directions. They have needs in the secondary. Tom Brady retired. They could still add a quarterback, even though they have Baker. Not a fan. But they should address the offensive line. That offensive line sucked. It sucked last year. It looks even worse right now. Their starting tackle Donovan Smith was released. They still have Tristan Wirfs, who can slide over to left tackle, which is great, but they still need at least one offensive tackle. I have them taking Darnell Wright here. Excellent, excellent value. There's a possibility he goes higher than this. He's been on a rocket ship this whole offseason. He had a great regular season. He had an excellent Senior Bowl. He did well in interviews leading up to everything. I mean, everything's just a rocket rise straight up for this guy's stock. Plug and play right tackle, which would be perfect for the Bucs. Give them an elite young duo of bookend tackles, lock them up, and go from there. Teams the needs are still plentiful for the Bucs, but Wright is an excellent prospect. Brings us to number 20, the Seattle Seahawks with their second pick of this first round. I had them taking Tyree Wilson, the edge rusher from Texas Tech, at 5th overall. And Seattle is a wild card, man. They can go in a number of directions here. I have them taking Lucas Van Ness with this 20th overall selection. Van Ness is a Seahawks type pick. What do the Seahawks typically go for with these high picks? Well, in general, they go for prototype size, uber athletes, just the rare gems that you want to mold and develop and have them grow into roles in your defense or your offense or whatever. I mean, if we're talking about raw potential, Van Ness is it. Elite physical tools, elite strength, prototype size, extremely raw. And yes, the Seahawks added Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed in free agency, but both of those players can have opt-outs after this season. So theoretically, they brought these two guys in, and both could be gone before next season starts. And Van Ness would be an automatic starter on the inside. He can play inside. He can play outside. He'll be a nice chess piece for Pete Carroll's defense. But the Chargers at 21, they're probably a little disgusted, but they'll be all right. They need defensive line help. Their run defense is atrocious. It was awful last season. It was awful this season. Second year in a row, one of the worst run defenses in the NFL. They added Eric Kendricks in free agency, but that's not going to do much in the grand scheme of things when your defensive line is just bad. So I have them shoring up the defensive line. I'm going to give them, where is he? Brian Bresee. I got to figure out how to say that kid's name. I'm so terrible with names. But why him over a guy like Elijah Cansey? It's, well, Bresee's got the prototype stuff. And I was talking to one of my buddies earlier about this being a weird draft class because we have the conversation of the prototype versus the potential, the size, speed guys versus the maybe not so big and not so fast. What is more important in the NFL? Well, teams tend to lean towards the prototype size, the elite speed, things like that. That's just the way the NFL is. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it's always going to be. Yes, you'll have teams that go for players who might not fit those parameters, and it works out. But for the most part, teams are going to go for the guy that's got everything by the book, quote unquote, physically. And that's Bresee. Injury concerns, but he's got an excellent combination of power and agility. He can make plays in the backfield. He's another one who has experience playing all along the defensive line. Plug him right in on their front, right up front on their defensive line from day one. The Baltimore Ravens. Now this was a fun one because right when I was doing this and putting my finishing touches on it, they signed Odell Beckham Jr. to a 1-year, I think like $18 million deal, something ridiculous. And signing Odell is nice. It's good. It's better than what they had, Nelson Aguilar and Rashad Bateman and nothing. But let's be honest, he hasn't done anything in a few years. He's injury issues now. It's older, and he's on a 1-year deal. What are you really going to expect out of him? Same thing with Nelson Aguilar. 1-year deal, getting older, more of a slot guy. No one's special. He's bounced around on a couple teams the last couple of years, but they're both on 1-year deals. They still need a long-term answer at the position. And I think a guy like Zay Flowers would fit in perfectly. And Zay is one of those players, lacking the prototype size, but he's elite in every other way. He's an elite route runner. Um, he can win on the outside, win from the slot, good in the open field, makes plays after the catch, not afraid to mix it up and go up for it, even though he's not going to win it consistently. He's the effort's there. He looks like a Ravens player if I had to pick one, and he'll fit a need. Him and Bateman could be a nice 1-2 punch for Lamar Jackson moving forward, but they have to address I think they have to address wide receiver at some point. If they don't go receiver here, I think corner is a strong possibility as well. But Flowers was just too good to pass up. He may not even be here at 22 overall come draft day. Minnesota Vikings, the 23rd overall. So we're at the 46, almost the 46-minute mark. And we're making good time, actually. Kind of sped this up. So let's go. The Minnesota Vikings at number 23 overall. They're another team. They can go corner. They can go defensive line. I thought hard about this, but really they can't pass. I don't think they can pass on a wide receiver. I have them taking Quentin Johnson, Silky Johnston, the wide receiver from TCU. I had him as my wide receiver 1 for a long time. I have since moved JSN up to my wide receiver 1, but it's close. I like both these players. Flowers is in the conversation as well, as is Addison, but Johnston falls. He's got questions about his route tree. He's got questions about his toughness when he goes up for the ball because he's got good size. He's got that prototype wide receiver 1 size that you look for on the outside. He's got elite explosiveness. And he's on tape, he's got good deep speed. But he's another one. He doesn't have that much smoke around him. No one's really talking about him that much. So that concerns me a little bit that he could fall not too far, but maybe to the end of the first round, maybe if it gets crazy, early second round. But I would be surprised if he wasn't a first round pick. So Minnesota can go corner, they can go D-line, but I have them going wide receiver here. They released Adam Thielen. Thielen went over to the Carolina Panthers as a free agent, and they have nothing besides Jefferson. It worked out picking Jefferson late in the first round. They're hoping they can strike gold twice in such a way. But Minnesota's another team with rumors that they might trade up for a quarterback. They might take a quarterback right there, like a Hendon Hooker if he's available, but I'm not buying that. Or Levis if he falls, but I'm not buying that either. So with neither of those being options for me here, I go Silky Johnston. 24 overall, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville's doing a good job of building it. Okay, they've got their quarterback. They've got some good pieces at wide receiver. They've got some young athletes on the defensive side of the ball. They're making their moves. I like the way this roster is coming together. They won their division. They made the playoffs. Their arrow as a franchise is pointing up, but they are a team with holes still to be filled. One of those being in the secondary at corner. I have them taken Deonte Banks, the corner from Maryland, here at number 24 overall. They also released Shaquille Griffin for what that's worth, who was one of their starting corners, one of their big free agent pickups from a few years ago. They cut him so they could save some cap space. They need some help. Campbell at corner is a good option, and they have other pieces, but Deonte Banks, his stock has been on the rise rapidly. He put forth an excellent performance at the scouting combine, showed everyone just how athletic he is. He's physical. He's got elite athleticism. He's shown very well in different schemes on defense. He can press. He can play off. He could go higher than this. All right. He's one of those guys who could go higher than the 24th slot. That would not surprise me at all. But he falls here, and he's a plug-and-play corner for Jacksonville. 25th, the New York Football Giants, the G-Men. The G-Men were weird for me. I kind of settled on a position of need just because it's such a glaring need, but they could surprise and they could go a number of ways. They still, in my opinion, need that alpha dog, that wide receiver 1 on the outside at wide receiver. They have a bunch of short, small, slotty receivers. And let's be honest, you're not going to do much with a bunch of slot wide receivers playing out of position. And Daniel Jones is not that quarterback who's going to elevate any of these guys and make them look better than they are. Okay. I mean, Mahomes is maybe the only one who can get away with having a bunch of slot receivers. But I digress. Outside of wide receiver, the biggest hole for the Giants, in my opinion, is the interior of the offensive line. They could either add a guard here, like Osiris Torrance, the guard from Florida, but I have them going in a different direction altogether. And he's not listed here. So let me just pull that up. There we go. John Michael Schmitz, the center from Minnesota. But you say, Dan, why would you take a center in the first round, 25th overall? Who is this guy? Well, relax, okay? Schmitz was a first team Associated Press All American. He started 36 career starts at center for Minnesota. He is a physical run blocker. He loves to mix it up. He performed extremely well at the Senior Bowl, showed out, and just was a rock steady force throughout the week. They have a gaping hole at center, which they cannot just slide by with some day 3 pick at center, because with Dan Jones at your quarterback position, who, yes, he cut down on the turnovers, he cut down on the fumbles this past season, but to expect that to happen again when the interior of the offensive line is in shambles as it is, you're kind of playing with fire. The kid likes to fumble. Okay, I don't care what happened last year. I'll believe what I saw prior. I think last year was the outlier. I guess we'll see. But getting a guy like John Michael Schmitz to slide in at center would be a good start to keeping his trajectory going up at the quarterback spot. Which brings us to number 26, the Dallas Cowboys. Another one. Tough pick, okay? A bunch of directions they can go in. They added Brandon Cooks from the Texans. Don't really need a wide receiver at this point, I don't think. They brought in Stephon Gilmore at corner via trade. Don't really think they need to add a corner right now either. They could use some help at safety, but you're not taking a safety here. Maybe they go offensive line, or maybe they go with one of these tight ends, since they love the tight end position so much. But they released Zeke Elliott. Yes, they franchise tag Tony Pollard, but when it comes to running backs with knee issues, you have to tread carefully. And I'm not saying Pollard is injury prone or anything crazy like that. But he can get nicked up, and he's coming off of anything. You got to be careful with that. Why not take Bijan Robinson, arguably the best offensive prospect in this class, maybe the best prospect in this class, regardless of position. A true blue chipper. I mean, I could see him going as high as 6 to the Lions if they're feeling squirrely and are done with DeAndre Swift. I could see him going 10th or 9th to the Bears if they want to give Justin Fields another piece. I can see him going 10 to the Eagles. I had him going 10 to the Eagles in my mock draft 1.0. So it's not that I think Robinson isn't that good or anything like that, but it's the running back position. And teams might be a little weary of investing a high pick in such a position where the turnover is so high and the injuries are so high and the length of a career in which you're sitting at the top or near the top of your position. The years kind of go by quick. I mean, Zeke Elliott was a top 5 pick. He had a great first few years, and ever since after those first 3 years went by, he's kind of steadily declining, and they released him. They want to run the ball. They want to commit to running the ball. Robinson would be a good piece, which leads us to the Buffalo Bills. Now, Buffalo's probably disgusted in this scenario. They probably would have traded up, if anything. That's the big rumor here. Apparently, Buffalo's looking to move up for either an offensive lineman or a skill position player, which, I mean, I guess they could go wide receiver, but I think if you're moving up, if you're Buffalo, you're moving up for Bijan Robinson or somebody like, or Gibbs if you think Gibbs is a better fit. But I think if you're moving up, if you're Buffalo, you're going up for Bijan. Let's be real. But since that's not an option here, Buffalo doesn't have any glaring holes. But I don't like their offensive line situation. I played with the idea of Osiris Torrance here, and I think that could very well be the pick, and it would be a great pick. Just slide him right in at guard. Start him instead of Ryan Bates at right guard. But if they don't want to go that route, you can find guards later on that are at the very least serviceable. So if you're not going to go interior offensive line, you're not going to go running back, why not go offensive tackle, shore up that position, shore up a right tackle, and go with a guy like Anton Harrison. Harrison had a great career at Oklahoma, allowed only 3 sacks and 800 plus pass blocking attempts over the last 2 seasons. He needs to add some strength and refinement in the ground game, but Buffalo passes a lot, and they got to protect Allen. I know Allen runs around a lot, and that's part of his game and part of what makes him so good, but you need to help this guy out. You can't just let him rely on his legs. That's going to get him in trouble. That's going to get him hurt, and you got to plan for stuff like that. So take a guy like Anton Harrison, plug him in at right tackle, and boom, you turn a potential weakness into a strength. All right. Winding down here. We're in the 56th minute. Thank you guys for sticking with me. I want to remind you all that the Grueling Truth is powered by betting.net. Betting.net is your best bet for finding the online casino or sportsbook that's right for you. So head on over to betting.net. Let me take a little sip of this. Damn, that's good. All right. Where are we here? I lost my spot. And here we go. This is why we can't have nice things. Okay. Cincinnati Bengals, 28th overall. Sitting pretty too, man. Another team. They're probably disgusted that Anton Harrison just got selected because their offensive line, despite draft picks in the last couple of years, despite free agent additions, they still suck. They have Jonah Williams slated as of now to start at right tackle. It's ugly. He wants to be traded. I know Mike, our fearless leader, Mike Goodpaster, hates Jonah Williams, wishes they would just move on from him. And they might. And they might very well take an offensive tackle here if one's available. They could go offensive guard in Osiris Torrance. I keep bringing that name up, but this is that range where guys like him tend to go. But they are missing one big piece to the offense, one thing that I think would help Joe Burrow out. Yes, he already has the best wide receiver trio in football, and they're going to be together at least for this season before T. Higgins' contract is up. But why not add to that? Beef up the offense a little bit more. Take a guy like, Michael Mayer, the Notre Dame tight end, who doesn't wow you with his athleticism, doesn't stand out in that way at all, but he's a good run blocker. He's a good receiver. He can, one of the few tight ends at the top, unlike a Dalton Kincaid, you can play Meyer right on the line. You can have him chip somebody and then break off. He's a good target in the red zone. Kincaid is a better receiver, but he offers absolutely nothing as a blocker. He would be one of the smallest starting tight ends in the league. And again, in a draft with a lot of outliers, Bryce Young, Kalijah Cansey, Dalton Kincaid, smaller guys than the prototype typically calls for. I mean, yes, we've seen smaller players succeed. That's not a big deal. But again, it's the NFL. Teams kind of lean towards these prototypes, lean towards these old school ideals. And Mayer is one of those. Plug and play tight end. I think it's great. I think he's a similar prospect to TJ Hawkinson when he came out. And I think he can be an immediate factor for the Bengals, especially in the red zone. The New Orleans Saints, 29th overall. This is where I had a little issue spotting like who I wanted to put there. Another team, okay, they could go tight end. They love using their tight ends, but they have a few that they like, okay? They need to upgrade the defensive line. They could add to wide receiver because you never know what you're going to get from Michael Thomas. And outside of Chris Olave, who had his own injury issues as a rookie, you don't really have anything at the position. So wide receiver could very well be in play here. But I went a different direction, and I went with Kalijah Kancey, the defensive lineman from Pittsburgh. Undersized, outlier, another one of those guys. Lacks size, lacks the length teams prefer on the inside, lacks the strength that you prefer from a guy on the inside. 6'1", 280 pounds, give or take. But he's explosive. He gets pressure up the middle. He ran the fastest 40-yard dash for defensive tackle since 2003 at the scouting combine. I know the scouting combine 40s for defensive linemen don't matter, but it just shows you how athletic he is and how explosive he is. And New Orleans does need help up front. Kalen Saunders and Nathan Shepard, they brought in as free agents, don't impress me. And Cam Jordan's getting older on the edge, and they could use some help up front. I think Kancey would be a nice plug-and-play option for him. At the very least, he could be a solid rotational guy behind the two vets. And then once those two guys move on, you have Kancey full-time. Hopefully he has the year to get a little stronger, get a little beefier, and that'll help his development. I don't think this is Aaron Donald 2.0, despite being similar size and from the same college. But I still think he could be a difference maker in the right defensive front, the right defensive scheme. And this brings us to our final 3 picks of this round, first round. Well, technically 2 picks, with Pittsburgh being the bonus at 32nd overall. But I digress. The Philadelphia Eagles, 30th overall. They took Devin Witherspoon with their first round pick. And this is another team that can go in a bunch of different directions. They probably would have liked to take Kancey here. They do have a need on the defensive line. They have a need at safety, but I don't think there's any safeties worth taking here at this point. Maybe they add depth at offensive line. Maybe they take one of these edge rushers, because that's what they do. They like to beef up the front 4. But I'm going to have them taking Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back from Alabama. I don't like taking running backs like this, but Gibbs is an elite athlete. And I know they have Boston Scott, who they re-signed and they love. They signed Rashad Penny in free agency. They still have Kenneth Gainwell, who will probably be their preferred third down back. But none of these guys is the dynamic threat that Jahmyr Gibbs is. Gibbs is another one, undersized, but he's explosive. He's fast. He's quick. He's got excellent vision and balance. And he may very well be the best pass-catching tailback in this entire class. And for a team like the Eagles, who run an exotic offense, they might find value in a guy like this. And if they are truly married to a guy like Gainwell being their third down back, Gibbs can spell him on third down, and that would even give Gibbs the opportunity to focus more on being that first and second down back. He doesn't have the prototype size that you look for. He's under 200 pounds, but that hasn't stopped him at the college level. And in a wide open offense, a read option offense like Philadelphia runs, I think he'd be an excellent piece for them. So have them taking Gibbs, and that leads us to the Kansas City Chiefs, your Super Bowl champion. We're an hour in. Thank you guys for sticking with us. Sticking with me. I have the Kansas City Chiefs at number 31 overall. Another team. Where would they go? I played around with the idea of maybe Will McDonald, the edge rusher from Iowa State. I love him. He's had an excellent pre-draft circuit as well. So McDonald stands out. Maybe in the secondary, if they want to go Cam Smith or Emmanuel Forbes. But I had them going with DeWand Jones. Mount Jones. They call him Thanos in Ohio State. And listen, they lost Wiley. They lost both of their starting offensive tackles, Wiley and his name is Brown, who went to Cincinnati as a free agent, signed a nice free agent deal with Cincinnati. They need 2 offensive tackles. They brought one in, Jawan Taylor from Jacksonville as a free agent, gave him a fat contract, which kind of blew my mind when I saw it. But if you're going to start Taylor at left tackle, theoretically, they could use the right tackle. I know they have Lucas Niang penciled in as the current starter, former third-round pick, but he's dealt with injury. He barely played this season. just completely irrelevant. Do you really want to depend on a guy like that when Patrick Mahomes is your quarterback? They might have the best interior offensive line in the league, but we saw what happens to this offense when their offensive line isn't right. The Bucks just slap him around in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, and if you can get to Mahomes, he is prone to that mistake, the mistake-prone part of being a gunslinger quarterback that comes out. So why not a guy like Jones? Elite size, a mountain of a man. He was absolutely dominant at the Senior Bowl to the point where I think he left midweek after a couple of practices and was like, yeah, I'm good. I don't have to show you guys anymore. Plug and play right tackle. Massive human being. I love it. So there you go. That's the entire first round. And you know what? For a bonus, we do have the Pittsburgh Steelers here. Our very own Sam Teets is a Steelers fan. I have them taking Joey Porter Jr. With their first pick. And why not? I mean, they have other needs, but where is this guy? Add another offensive lineman. And it says your draft is complete. So let's save this and let's just take a look at it, C to B. Now, my mock is on the gruelingtruth.com. I think there's a link at the bottom that you can click that'll lead you there. If not, copy and paste it. It'll take you to the mock draft on the Grueling Truth, along with write-ups and highlight videos and all that pretty stuff. But I wanted to do something here, break it down a little bit more, give you guys something to watch if you don't prefer to read all the wonderful analysis I provided.
That's right.
But here it is.
I'm on a hippo.
If you guys have any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out. Follow me on Twitter, my handle, or Instagram. The handle is at DB Talking Sports. D as in Dan, B as in Bob. I'll be doing this every week. Mock draft Monday. I'd like to do it next Monday, another mock draft for you guys. Maybe do a show later on this week with Sam Teets, where we break down some of the teams, some of their targets, and talk general draft stuff. Like I said, we got a couple of more weeks before the draft is here. It's at the end of the month. I'm excited. I do want to address one more thing before I go, and that's Hendon Hooker. There are rumors that Hooker is seeing his stock rise. Another one, like a rocket ship, okay? I'm not buying it. I don't believe that he's going to go ahead of Richardson or Levis. I don't believe I saw... I think it was Mike Tannenbaum or somebody like that on ESPN had Hendon Hooker, I think, 5th going to the Seahawks. I'm not buying that. That is way too rich for my blood. I don't think he's a first-round quarterback. I'll be fine taking him in the second round, but I don't think 5th is way too high. I don't think a team like Tampa Bay would be interested. I don't think Detroit's going to be going for him at 18th overall when they have other needs. Minnesota at 23 when they have other needs. Sure, maybe they could go that route, but I'm not buying it. Why don't you reach out to me on Instagram, on Twitter? Let me know how you feel. Let me know if you think the Hooker rumors are true. But for now, I am Dan Kornhauser. Thank you guys for tuning in. Let me get rid of that screen, bring my pretty face back up. Hey, Steve. Thanks, Steve. He says, great job, Dan. Thanks, Steve. Miss you, bud. We got to get you back on the Wednesday show. We got to talk football and all that good stuff. But give me a follow at DB Talking Sports. D as in Dan, B as in Bob. Thank you guys for tuning into another edition of the NFL Draft Show here on the Grueling Truth, where legends speak.